You're listening to the Public Finance Live podcast series, brought to you by the PF editorial team, directly from CIPFA's 2025 annual conference in Birmingham, England. You can listen to our full series of episodes on the big issues being discussed at this year's conference by searching PF Live wherever you get your podcasts, or by visiting the podcast section of the Public Finance website. Hello, I'm John Watkins, Group Editor of Public Finance, and I'm your host for this latest episode of the Public Finance Live podcast. This episode, we will be discussing a topic that will resonate with many public sector organisations right now, and that is how to steer complex services through major disruption as public sector bodies, and in particular local government organisations, navigate the tension between cost cutting and investing in outcomes, all while maintaining a grip on critical services. Finance leaders' roles have never been more critical. So this session will explore how finance leaders can embrace complexity and use the right tools to plot a course through the chaos and deliver better outcomes that cost less. The episode is sponsored by public sector consultancy IMPOWER, and I'm pleased to say I'm joined by three expert guests to discuss this topic. They are Ebony Hughes, Chief Operating Officer at IMPOWER, Nina Phillippides, Deputy Chief Executive and Executive Director of Corporate Resources at Gloucestershire County Council, who will explain for us exactly how her organisation is navigating a path through reform, reorganisation and disruption, and Andy Burns, Associate Director, former President of CIPFA and an advisor at IMPOWER. Welcome all.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So let's get into this topic. We've got lots to discuss and lots of questions. Andy, I'll start with you if you don't mind. Can you just tell us a bit about, just how difficult it is right now for local authorities to manage the pace of change we're seeing while minimising disruption to services? And I guess the pressure it's putting on their finance teams in particular.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's really difficult, to state the obvious, but it is really difficult. But also, it's not new. Councils have been doing this for a long time. You could go back to the first round of austerity following the coalition government, but through the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, and then more recently now in the context of reorganisation and reform. And councils have had a remarkable track record of doing it and doing this. But actually, what I see is what's ahead is harder than what's behind. And why do I say that? I think the pace is faster. Resources are more constrained. Councils have hollowed out in terms of their capacity sometimes to deal with this sort of stuff. The easier savings have all been made, and the pace of the cost increases are greater than they've been for a while. And then there's also an enhanced level of public and media scrutiny fueled by social media, for example. So I think there's all that there, and I think you can describe that many different ways. People talk about a perfect storm. They talk about a voluntary, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment like a VUCA world. However you describe it, though, I think as a finance professional, as a finance director of finance teams, what's happening is people's costs are rising faster than their income, and therefore there's a gap that's growing. Costs are rising by between 5 and 10% in most places, and income's only rising by between 3 and 5%. So costs are rising through inflation and demographic pressures, social care, housing and others, and income is constrained in how much it can rise through council tax limitations, etc. So I think for finance teams, it's about how do you reduce your costs at the same time as growing your income, and I think that's the exam question. And I think it's got to be a combination of reducing demand or the need to spend, growing your income or your tax base, maybe higher fees and charges, to try and bring the increase in your costs down from 10 to nearer 5%, say, and increase your income from 3 to 5. If you can't do that, it's not sustainable. Now, the government have given lots of short-term help through additional grants, social care presets, and there's a prospect of further reform further down the line through fair funding and social care. But actually, we still haven't had those. So there's an issue about how do we manage the short term while waiting for longer term solutions. And I think finance teams are at the heart of trying to manage all that on behalf of their organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. Ebony, you're out in the market speaking to public sector organisations all the time about this challenge. What are you seeing in terms of how local authorities in particular are struggling to manage structural reorganisation, political change, national reform, and all those other pressures that Andy mentioned?
It's really tough, and there's absolutely a risk that this can be organisationally, but also personally overwhelming for the professionals working in this space. Like you say, there's those different layers of what's happening at the moment. We see the kind of operational and management layer that has to be got right, setting the right foundations for the future, whilst you're still trying to manage and improve what you're doing right now and do that within the right financial envelope for now, whilst also being in a state where you might not be in that organisational form 2 years down the line. So a huge complexity there. You then add on a political layer, which can be quite new sets of priorities, new approaches, new leadership to bring on board and to factor in, and all the relationships and the dynamics that come with that and that just add to the complexity. And then you have further kind of external factors which are outside of your control but will set a path for where you need to be. So not just things like local government reform, but also things like the CQC, changes through high needs reform, social care reform. How do you stay abreast of all of those things and feed them into what your future looks like? Hugely challenging. And to do that and to get through that, you need to have absolute strength of managerial grip on all these different moving parts. You've got to piece this jigsaw together, but you also need to be able to lead, and leading across boundaries with different groups of different political intentions, different priorities and different spaces. And there's lots of changes that I haven't even mentioned at the same time that will still be factoring in. So a huge amount to think about. And I think the professionals that are here today to have skill sets that will be invaluable in terms of helping that grip. One thing that I think's been really important to not lose sight of, and one thing that's fantastic with the work we've been doing with our clients, is where people have lifted up and thought about, well, what outcomes can all of these changes enable us to deliver? What difference can this make down the line? And it's great, for example, to see prevention quite high on the agenda here over these couple of days, and to recognise that we do have an opportunity to do something different that can lead to a better outcome in the end. But it's going to be, we have to embrace the complexity that will get us there.
Yeah, absolutely. Nina, thanks for joining us also. We know that organisations are under huge pressure to transition and to manage the change that comes with that, and it's not easy. Your organisation is one of many chosen by the government to reorganise from 2 tiers into one. And I know you're in the early stages of that journey, but can you give us a sort of quick overview of Gloucestershire's story and kind of what lies ahead for you?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So Gloucestershire was invited to submit its plans back in March. So we worked collaboratively across our 6 districts and with the County Council to put forward a number of proposals, all under one banner. So we've got 3 options on the table that are now being explored. One is for a single unitary for the whole of Gloucestershire. We're a population of around 660,000 people in Gloucestershire. Another is for an east-west split across 6 of our districts, and an alternative that's also being explored is around an expanded Greater Gloucester model with a unitary that sits around the edges of it as well. So we put those interim plans back in March. We weren't successful in getting our elections delayed, so we had then all-out elections in May. Prior to the election, our Conservative administration was quite clear that they supported a single unitary for Gloucestershire, so we had quite a clear steer. We've had the election. We now have a Lib Dem minority administration. We have got 4 Lib Dem districts, 2 Greens, and where we are now politically is that our new administration is agnostic. So they want to explore a single unitary and they want to explore 2 unitaries for Gloucestershire, and they want to see both of those proposals worked up to the point of deliverability. So we've had to be very agile and flexible in our approach, working with our partners, working with our districts, working with our stakeholders, so that we can effectively put forward, come November, to full council, 2 proposals for Gloucestershire. They're evidence-based, data-led, deliverable, and intellectually neutral is the language that we're using in Gloucestershire. So a lot of work, but we're very much committed in Gloucestershire to making sure that whatever the decision, and ultimately it'll be the minister's decision, that whatever decision is made we can deliver it, and we're bought into it, and we can make it work, however that plays out.
Obviously, huge forecasting and working out to be done around all of those scenarios, adding even more pressure onto already strained resources and finance teams, no doubt. What are some of the specific complexities you expect to face along your journey? Are there things that you really foresee being the big challenges for you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges. I mean, they've been touched upon by Andy and Ebony briefly. I mean, I think a fair funding review is going to be a major challenge for us, because we're not going to get the outcomes of those reviews until after we've already submitted our proposals into government. So there is an open question around what is the platform that you are forecasting against, budgeting against, planning against. So that's one element of it. I think there's other aspects too, though. I mean, politically, these are really big decisions that our politicians have got to make across our districts, across our county councils. We've got 6 or 7 MPs as well within the mix too. So working and navigating through those competing pressures is complex and challenging. Culturally, I think, and organisationally, this is really difficult stuff. Ultimately, districts and counties will not exist. I think that is a really difficult thing for individuals and teams to get their heads around. And there is a grieving process that's going on currently within our organisations, and that's difficult. So there is a whole piece around how do we support our staff, support our recruitment and retention processes, so that ultimately we end up with new organisations that are sustainable and have got good cultures within them around delivering good public service. The day job. We did do stuff before local government reorganisation, believe it or not, and making sure that our existing transformation programmes still continue. Ebony's referred to the reform agendas more broadly, adults, children, SEND. We can't afford to stop doing those things. We've got to make sure our houses are in order moving into these new organisations. So we're sort of twin tracking a kind of, a business as usual, continuous improvement, transformation, and then fundamental reform all at the same time. And so that is really difficult to navigate in that sort of context of people worrying about what their futures are going to look like too. So really difficult. Stakeholders, extremely complex. A lot of different people are interested in what the future looks like. Trying to navigate through that is complicated and difficult. And I think collaboration, it's really important that we deliver and deal with these issues in a collaborative way, working with our partners, working with our stakeholders, and co-produce as much as possible. But timing is exceptionally tight. So to do that genuinely with such tight timelines is really tricky. And I think ultimately we've got to keep focused on what do we do for our residents? How do we make sure our communities are stronger at the end of this and have got better access to services, better outcomes all round? So really thinking about how we deliver services on the ground is mission critical, and we need to be doing that thinking now, so that as we're putting forward our proposals, that is front and centre of our minds. And of course, there'll be a multitude of different answers to that question, depending on where you live, how you feel, what your services are, etc. So complex. I could go on a little bit longer, but I won't.
Incredible amount to juggle. I know you're at the early stages of your journey, but are there things that you've done or decisions you've made or approaches that you've taken that you would share from a practitioner point of view, as somebody who's in the front line of this, that has really put the organisation in a good stead for in good stead for the next stages?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's keeping talking, and knowing that things are going to get difficult. So your relationships are going to be absolutely mission critical to making this land, and knowing that at the end of the day, whatever the minister decides during this kind of interim period where we're working out what the options are going to be and what then is taken forward, as officers, we've then got to come together and as politicians and deliver on it. So we can't afford to be falling out along this period of time, because actually we've all got to come together to make this work. So it's how to have healthy disagreement, because there is no one way to deliver this, and that's healthy, that's robust, and that's how we get better outcomes. But keeping that focus on what's the end game here. I think there's a whole piece in here about how we own our numbers, and how we make sure we understand them. And I think that's where finance practitioners and professionals come into the fore. Ultimately, our advisors will leave us at points in time, and we need to make sure we know our numbers, own them, and then can deliver and track against those savings that are put forward. So that's going to be absolutely mission critical. as well. I think having a focused team as well that is dedicated to this, have got the skills, got the capacity, really can learn from each other, really committed to how we get this over the line. We haven't done this before, so it's how do we bring in those skills, bring in that expertise to do that effectively, and balance that off with the business as usual transformation agenda, being really robust for your PMO. And I think over-communicate. I don't think we can communicate enough, whether it's your members, whether it's your town and parish councils, whether it's just businesses, your residents, your staff. Everybody wants to know what's going on. And if you don't fill those gaps, you create a vacuum and people will fill that with their own messages. So I think that's going to be really, really critical too. And having good, robust governance and decision-making so that everybody knows who's making what decisions, what you're aiming for, where you're moving to, and keeping a really tight grip on it.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you sort of what success will look like at the end of this for you. And I guess what I mean by that is, do you have something that you focus on, to make sure that you are your focus is on delivering the right outcome? You spoke there about keeping services in mind and citizen focused and outcome focused. So what do you focus on throughout the journey to make sure that the outcome is the right one?
I think that's a really good question, because what we've got to keep focused on while we're kind of in the mire of all of the detail, we've got to keep focused on what is the point of this exercise. The point of the exercise is so that we create sustainable organisations that can make sure that we're delivering better outcomes to our residents. And that will look different in different places. In Gloucestershire, we've got to keep focused on what are the biggest needs and biggest challenges and biggest opportunities for Gloucestershire, for our residents, for our businesses. And what we're doing is we're thinking about, well, what's our vision? What's our ambition? What do we want to achieve for our place? And then how do we set ourselves up in a way that actually ensures that we deliver against those outcomes? And there'll be a few different things in there. One will be around delivering those cost savings that we know should come from reorganising. And then how do we deliver those in a sustainable way so that we can then invest in those things that matter most to our residents, those things that will drive economic growth, deliver better housing, reduce our health inequalities, reduce deprivation. And ultimately, I think, really land in a space where our partnerships are strong and that we really do work as a system across Gloucestershire to deliver for our residents. What I would like to see at the end of this, and I want us to have as a key success factor as well, is how do we use data and insights? We hold significant amount of data across Gloucestershire, not just from our councils, but from our NHS, from our police partners, and other stakeholders too. How are we setting ourselves up and investing now so that we're able to use that, so that we're driving our targeted resources in the places that they need to be, not just providing general universal services in places that actually aren't really getting their biggest bang for their buck. So I think those are the big success factors for me. I mean, along the way, we'll be thinking about employee engagement. How do we make sure we're keeping our staff, they're feeling fulfilled, they want to carry on working for our services. Stakeholders, how do they feel in the mix of this? Are they feeling like their needs are being met when they understand them? And having a good, strong culture. How are we setting something up that really is fit for the future and makes people want to come into local government and do a really good job, which I think we're all really passionate about, and I want to see us delivering that into the future.
Yeah, such good insights, and thank you for sharing those. Ebony, IMPOWER, works with organisations going through complex change, just like Nina describes there. What are the key ingredients for success from your side? What can local authorities do to give themselves the best possible chance of a positive outcome?
So I think Nina brought so much of it to life, actually, in terms of it's consistent with the things that I'm going to say here. And it's fantastic to hear how that's all woven through what Gloucestershire's doing, or what's happening in Gloucestershire. The first thing we'd start with in terms of all of this fitting as part of how you embrace complexity and lean into it is that point about ambition. Do you know what your end game is? Are you clear on what you're trying to achieve through this? And how will that make sure that keeps you going? Because this is a long journey to go through, and you need that clarity of endpoint to get you there. But you also need to not underestimate what you need to do to create that ambition, and how much work will need to go into making sure it is shared and it is commonly held and understood by the people that it matters most to, in terms of getting it where it needs to be. So ambition, absolutely essential. Another theme that Nina picked out was about the point about data, insights, evidence, absolutely fundamental. But in doing this, how we work with our clients is also helping them to look at different data, insights and evidence than they would have done if we were continuing on the straight path that we are at the moment. So actually, do you need to look at different population data? Do you need to look at your needs differently? How might this look down the line? And also using that data and insight to understand another point that Nina made about whether it's deliverable and what that deliverability looks like. One big thing, I think, is remembering the kind of human in all of this, and that comes from a few different angles, and probably the main driver for why it is so complex. So, like Nina referenced, people will be going through a grieving process. They will be going through kind of uncertainty. There will be lots of kind of cultural challenges that are all affecting the people that are trying to guide you through. You obviously also have a range of relationships that are going to be the biggest thing from our experience in terms of the pace at which you can work, what gets in the way, what are the barriers. And whilst we live in a time where we're trying to do things like make the most of AI, of data and insight, unless you can bring the human into this, you're not going to get through the sticky challenges that will make it so tough as we go. And then with all of that, and I think something that Nina demonstrated and how she described it is, how do you have this grip on it? How do you know how all of these different component parts will fit together? And importantly, that's kind of where we recognise and come into contact with it, supporting people to move from where they need to be to where they need to be. But that important point about owning it and making sure that you do know your numbers, your story, you're fully equipped to get you through that point, and planning that for the long haul, because it's a lot of that stamina that it will take to get through this process. Stamina and resilience, I think, are going to be absolutely key, because there will be other challenges that come in along the way, even if you're kind of setting a straight path.
Very much so. Andy, you're incredibly well connected across the CIPFA membership and the wider public sector finance audience. What's your kind of tips for them in terms of equipping themselves to successfully manage this perfect storm you talked about?
Okay. It's the first thing I think about. How do I follow Nina and Ebony with those fantastic, authentic insights? But actually, some of that chimes with, I think, what I would say. I think maybe something firstly about organisationally, and then professionally and personally, what you need to think about. I think those councils have been successful at delivering better outcomes for less. I think there's some common themes that we see, and I think one of those is actually they have a grip on the here and now as well as an eye on the future. It's not either or, it's got to be and both. So they think about the now, but they also have an eye on the future. They also have a real corporate approach. The whole organisation deal with the challenge. It isn't just the finance director deal with it. Actually, you need to get a whole organisation buy-in across the leadership team and also with politicians, and to make sure there's really good alignment. And therefore, there needs to be a really good plan, whether it's a community plan or corporate strategy, whatever it's called, but a plan for the place which has a real focus on outcomes. And then, actually, to deliver that, you need to prioritise. And you can't do everything. You've got to decide what are the immediate priorities and what are the longer term ones, and actually have attention on those. So that's what the first thing I would say. Now, what matters most today, what matters in 3 years' time, what matters in 5 years' time, recognising the uncertainty we described earlier on. It's important to invest in capability and capacity to do it alongside the day job. And those who've done it well have used things like transformation reserves to actually build capacity, whether that's about HROD change, it's about procurement, it's about business partnering. It's also to fund double running costs as you're making a change from one service offer to another. You've got to fund both. So I think people have thought about how do you create a transformation reserve to try and help you do that capability enhancement and also the dual running thing. In thinking about the decisions you make, always be thinking about impact on resilience, both financial resilience, service resilience, personal resilience, and test your decisions about what's this doing to, or is it enhancing or is it diminishing it? I think that's a key feature. And the point about data and evidence, I think yes, absolutely, but actually tracking basic stuff like understanding your costs and your activity and your performance, the basic measures, and track them over time. Compare yourself with yourself over time, and compare yourself with others. And sometimes in being seduced by the new technologies and new data insights, the basics of tracking your numbers, whether it's your pounds and your customers. So that they're really important. And of course, use technology, but the technology has got to be, I guess, to enhance the customer experience. Technology isn't going to save you money unless you switch off the analog service that's designed to replace. So I think we see those features and those who are doing it well. And I think from a personal point of view as well, as a finance leader, you have a responsibility for your own health and well-being and to lead by example and show the organisation it's okay that I've got a life-work balance. I'm investing in my own health and well-being. Whatever it is that you do to relax or unwind, you've got to show that that's okay and should do that. And the best organisations and the politicians enable that to happen, but you've got a leadership role there as well, so whatever it is. And then tend to your networks, come to things like this, and talk to your peers and your colleagues and others who are going through the same issues. The amount of insights that you can get from talking to others about these same sort of issues, I think is really, really key. And then finally, just think about your own personal professional development and use like mentors or coaches. But I think it's okay. And not just okay, but actually I would say it's a requirement that you invest in yourself and you show the organisation that it's okay to invest in yourself. Because as both Nina and Ebony said, there's actually the human dimension to all this is what's going to make it work. And if you don't tend to those sort of things, personal resilience will fall, organisational resilience will fall, financial resilience will suffer, and citizens will suffer. And nobody wants that.
No, indeed. That's brilliant. Thank you all for a really insightful discussion through this issue with some brilliant insights on how public sector organisations can manage the change in front of them effectively and in such a fast-paced environment. If you would like to learn a bit more about Gloucestershire's story and indeed IMPOWER's approach, that's a session. There is a session taking place that will discuss that in a bit more detail on day 2 of PF Live, 11:30, day 2. And if our listeners want to connect with you directly, Ebony, I assume they can do that too. What's the best way to do so?
If you're here today, then come along to our stand. We'd love to see you. Alternatively, if you hop onto our website, you'll see how to contact us really easily. And please do reach out.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Thanks again to all of you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of PF Live 2025. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
You've been listening to an episode of our Public Finance Live podcast series, brought to you by the PF editorial team directly from CIPFA's 2025 annual conference in Birmingham, England. You can listen to our full series of episodes on the big issues being discussed at this year's conference by searching PF Live wherever you get your podcasts.